ahead and share the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And we have a couple of spots where we'll stop for questions. I mean, you could put questions in the chat window at any time, but I'll probably only maybe look at that during the question segments so I can kind of focus on, uh, what I'm going through at that moment as far as the content. Um, so really what we're going to be talking about is pollinator gardening in our specific region of the low desert here in central Arizona. So go ahead and advance. Three things we'll talk about. We'll talk just a little bit about the Maricopa Native Seed Library so folks know what it is and what's available and how they can use it. And then we're going to get into what are the different, well, what is pollination? What are the different pollinators in our region? And what do they need as far as, what do they need from us as gardeners or future gardeners? And then we'll look at what are some of the different plants that you can add to your yards or your balconies or whatever space you have to help support pollinators. So that's sort of a general framework of where we're going. Go ahead and advance the slide. So as far as the Maricopa Native Seed Library, this was started as a sabbatical project that I started in August. So it's a service of the Maricopa Community Colleges, and it's currently available at Red Mountain, at Phoenix College, and at Gateway Community College. And so what we're trying to do is really inspire and give people the tools they need to create habitat at home for wildlife, specifically pollinators, but not only pollinators. This came about because I was seeing more and more as I looked around that most people's home landscapes don't have much in the way to support our pollinators, very little, in fact, in a lot of cases. And there's a really great book, if you're not familiar with it, Doug Tallamy. He's written several books on this topic. Nature's Best Hope is one of the, I think, most recent ones. And what he's saying in this book is that our wildlands are no longer large enough because they've been diminished through, human development and such, that they're not going to be enough to support wildlife, and that what we grow at home really matters, and what we grow in our own home landscapes, whatever those landscapes might be, really matters to what can live around us. And he's got some really compelling thoughts, I think, and I've heard him speak a few times. And so he really inspired me to create the seed library because I'm seeing that there's just not a lot of these native plants available in our area. So the seed library is available to help people obtain these seeds, many seeds that you can't get anywhere other than often driving down to Tucson, which is more of a mecca for native plants. And as I mentioned, it's a distributed model. We have seed at 3 locations right now to try to reach as many people as possible across the valley. Oh, I should also mention too, a seed library, they're normally part of a physical traditional library as one of their services. And it's not like you borrow it like a book and have to bring it back. It's, it's seed to take with you. Some seed libraries ask people to return if they get a good crop, to try to return seeds, donate seeds, things like that. But generally the idea is kind of on an honor system to take no more than 3 packets, a month, to make sure that everybody is able to get some seed that wants seed. Go ahead and advance. So we're more than seed distribution too. There's some other aspects to the mission. There's some demonstration gardens that I've been kind of adding to. At SCC, there's a really amazing native, really pollinator garden there that I've added plants to. And then at Red Mountain, I've added about 30 plants to the existing Cienega area, in the center of campus, that marsh uh, that planted area there, and then in front of the Palo Verde building. So the idea there is that people can come and look at the plants and get an idea of what they look like and what their growth, and kind of get a sense before they make selections in the seed library. So also we're hoping to have those be a seed source. They already are. The one at SCC in particular is already a seed source for the seed library, but the other one at Red Mountain, we're trying to build that up so people that'll be another seed source for the seed library. We do workshops like this. There's some that have been recorded and are on our website, and also I'm working on some lesson plans that relate to native plants. And we're working on how to connect students, to this whole project. And we've applied for a grant to fund some internships, and we're looking at all the ways we can connect the students to the project, because there's a lot of different I think avenues and connections across many different aspects of the curriculum. So let me see what, oh, like go ahead and advance the slide, and then I'll stop for questions because I see a few have come up. Um, I was already introduced, but I just wanted to mention a couple other little details as far as my background, and that is that I don't have any formal training like in horticulture or related fields really. I have a biology background, but not real training in this area. The training for me has come from the plants, from growing them and living with them day by day and season by season. I started out, I bought a house in 2011 that had just bare dirt, as you can see in the picture there. And I've added a lot of plants, about 150 species over a decade. Now, now that shouldn't, I don't say that to have that be a standard or to be daunting, because you definitely do not need to plant to that level to support wildlife. We'll talk more about what maybe is a minimum requirement, but definitely 150 species is way above and beyond, what a typical person would want or need to do. But by all means, if people want to build extensive gardens, that's awesome. But I just wanted to point out, kind of my background has been, my learning lab has been these plants in this garden and learning about their needs and their habits, and things like that through just being with them day by day, stepping outside and seeing what's going on with them day by day. So I wanted to just stop and see if I think there was a couple of questions. Where can we go to get them for ourselves if you can't go to campus? So right now we have 3 locations, and Red Mountain is doing it as curbside. So you could call the library and get, arrange for pickup of seeds. And actually Phoenix College, if that's nearby you, you can drive
Mm.
there and go in, and anyone's
I
welcome to go into the
can
the outer part of the library, and they have the seeds there on a table. And then Gateway right now is kind of restricting access to faculty, staff, and students, but those are the 3 places. So any other questions at this point before we move on to the next section? And there'll be time for questions at the end as well. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So I want to talk about pollinators as far as um, who they are. And this will mainly talk about native bees, because they are our primary pollinators. Now, in the low desert, we have our native bees, which a lot of people aren't that familiar with, and we'll talk about the different types. And then there are also the introduced honeybees that are introduced from Europe originally. But the native bees here, there's over 1,000 species of them in the Southwest, and they are our primary pollinators. So what's going on with pollination is that it's part of the life cycle, the reproductive cycle of flowering plants. In order for the plant to reproduce through seed, um, it requires pollination. So you have male parts and female plants of the parts of the flowers. And so with pollination, you have the pollen grains, which are like male sperm. They carry the genetic material for half of the offspring, and then you have female eggs, analogous to a human eggs. And so those, they need to come together. And so pollinators help that by transferring pollen from a male part of a plant to a female part, sometimes in the same plant, sometimes in other plants. It depends on the species and a lot of different things, but that's generally what's going on with pollination. And so pollination is really important. A lot of our food crops rely on that. About 35% of our food crops rely on a pollinator. And another way of thinking of it is 1 in every 3 bites of our food came from plants that required pollination. And so there's a lot of importance to pollination as a function in ecosystems. So going back to bees, why they're some of the best pollinators is because of all the different pollinators, and you can see the list there, they're the only ones that actively gather pollen. That means that they go out of their way to seek the pollen out because they use it for a food source for themselves and their offspring. whereas the other pollinators are not interested in pollen. They're going there just for the nectar. And the nectar is like a sweet energy source, but pollen is also a very good food source, but bees are the only ones, and some wasps, that actively gather it. So when bees are going visiting a flower, and they're actively trying to gather pollen, so they're going to get more pollen than maybe a butterfly or a bat that's just coming in to get a quick bit of nectar and may accidentally sort of get some pollen on them. But bees are actively gathering pollen, so that's why they are some of our best pollinators. They also exhibit this behavior called flower constancy, which means that during a foraging trip, or sometimes an entire day, or even in their whole lifetime, they'll only visit one species of plant. So you can imagine how that can be a benefit to the plants, because if it's only then carrying the pollen, it's not wasting any pollen, it's only carrying the pollen needed to the other members of that species, that so they can reproduce. If it was jumping between, sunflower and, brittle bush, two different flowers, then it's carrying pollen to two different flowers and it's wasting some of that pollen. But they exhibit this flower constancy. And then another thing about native bees is that compared to honeybees, they'll go out earlier in the morning, later in the day, and even in some rainier, windier conditions than honeybees. So there's a whole bunch of reasons our native bees are some of our best pollinators. There are other pollinators, including, we'll talk about them, beetles, flies and wasps, butterflies and moths, hummingbirds and bats are all our pollinators here in the Sonoran Desert. And one other point I want to mention too is that many of the sources about pollinated gardens say that if you can provide good habitat for native bees, you're largely going to provide good habitat for all the other pollinators as well, because a lot of the needs will be met. But we will talk about some specific needs of some of the other pollinators as well. So let's go ahead and advance. I want to talk a little bit more about the bees. There's a variety of about 7 different groups of native bees here in the Southwest. You may or may not have seen some of them. People don't notice them. They're not as big, or, well, some of the bumblebees are larger, but you don't often see them unless you're out hiking. I don't often see them in the built up areas. But these are often smaller and missed. They're just not observed as much, or not noticed. Sweat bees, though, you might notice, because sometimes they'll land on you because they like sweat. They like human sweat, the salts. And they're very small. They're active year round, and they nest in the ground. And that's going to be an important thing. If you look through this list, most of our native bees are either nesting in the ground or in dead wood, or they excavate tunnels in plant material. Squash and gourd bees are specialists in pollinating squashes and gourds. So if you're growing crops of those, in a garden at home, you may see those types of bees. They're active when those plants are flowering. Then we have a whole group just of cactus bees that specialize in cactus flowers. And so some of those are active now, because you see that some of our cactus are blooming, like the prickly pears have started recently in the last week or two. They nest in the ground. Then you have leafcutter and mason bees that nest in dead branches, and they pollinate several different types of important plants here: cactus, sunflower, the sunflower family, and the legumes, which are many of the bean plants, including mesquite and several of our trees, Palo Verde. Then you have digger bees that are ground nesting, medium-sized, and then the carpenter bees are some of the larger bees that I've seen in my garden here, and they will build their nests inside of dead wood. And then the bumblebees are the ones in the list that are generally the only ones that are social bees. These other ones, most of the other ones, I think there's maybe a few mason bees, I think it is, that might be social, but generally they're all solitary. They live a solitary life. They don't form a colony or nest with others like honeybees. But bumblebees are the exception. They do form kind of colonies, and they like to nest under rocks or abandoned rodent burrows. So that's just a general introduction to the bees. This Chambers and all, which I'll have in the bibliography at the end, is a really good PDF that talks about in more detail about the pollinators in the Southwest. Go ahead and advance. So these are some lesser known pollinators. The flies, beetles, and wasps. What's really cool about the flies is that they're often mistaken for bees. They look like them, but the way to tell them apart is how many pairs of wings do they have. If it's one pair, it's a fly. If it's two pairs, it's a bee. And you can see that top picture there is a type of bee fly, kind of pretty with the orange and the black. Um, Engaging in collecting pollen, hopefully going to get pollen on its body. The one below it is a checkered beetle, and you can see the pollen on its body. Generally, the hairier the body of the animal, and insects are animals, generally the hairier their bodies, the more they're going to collect pollen, because it's going to adhere. Whereas the wasps are not as good at pollinating because their bodies are smoother. But there is a group of wasps that are important in fig pollination, which, that's a crop that's here in the Southwest that's important. So I just wanted to highlight these a little bit because they're not as well known as some of the other pollinators, but they fill a valuable role. So let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. The butterflies and moths. Now, these are some of my favorites. Um, but, I read an article just in the last week or so that was saying, conserve butterflies and moths, but not so much because they're pollinators, but for all the other reasons, their value in and of themselves, their importance in the food chain, but not so much that they're that big important of pollinators, because there's a lot of times they can get into, because they're not actively collecting pollen, remember, like bees. So they can sometimes get in and get the nectar and get out and not get the pollen on their bodies. And in fact, I just learned that I'm not going to pronounce the word right, their proboscis, um, it it can get clogged with pollen. So they're trying to avoid the pollen and just get the nectar, which is their energy source for the adults. So they are pollinators, but their role in pollination is probably not as large as we like to think, and it's definitely not as large as bees. So they are important, um, but just want to point out, just that thought about it. They do provide a lot of other important value in ecosystems as well. Just kind of backing up, I kind of got into some other detail, but I just want to mention there's some pictures here of butterflies that are and moths in the Southwest. Those are photographs I've taken of different species, and generally your butterflies are daytime active and your moths are nighttime active. But the police car moth shows us that there's always exceptions in the living world, and that police car moth is a daytime moth. So you can't always draw a hard line, with things in the living world. There's always exceptions and things like that. But what is in common also about butterflies and moths is that they have several parts of their life cycle and a distinct food needs in each of their parts of their life cycle. So we'll start with the adult female laying eggs. So when they lay eggs, they will lay eggs only on what is called a larval host plant, which is normally like either one specific plant or group of plants. So they will only lay their eggs on that specific. You might be familiar with milkweeds, and that's why they're so important for monarch and queen butterflies, because the females will only lay their eggs on monarchs. So if there's no monarchs, there's no reproduction because they will not lay their eggs on anything else, really. Um, so the host plants are really important. And that's one thing that, we were talking about how bees can, if you provide habitat for bees, you'll cover most of the other pollinators. But larval host plants would be important too, because that could be missed, unless you're intentionally, added that into your landscape. You may be able to attract adult butterflies that'll fly in for nectar if you've got a lot of blooming plants that have nectar, but then they have to go somewhere else to reproduce. They can't reproduce without their host plants. And so that's a really important thing to consider or to be knowledgeable about is the larval host plants. And sometimes those aren't the most attractive plants, and some of them might look weedy, and we'll talk about some of them, but they fill a really important role. And then also some folks will be like, well, why do I want to put a plant in my yard that a bunch of caterpillars are going to, mow down and eat? And they usually don't kill the plant, but they they take a good toll on it. But that's the whole purpose of what that plant is providing, and they come back. And if you have multiples of that plant and that sort of thing. So just something, it's a different mindset, like, people often just plant, well, what's pretty to me? I want to plant what's pretty to me. And then they just have these nectar plants because they like the flowers and they're really pretty, but then they're not providing for butterflies throughout their life cycle. So that's just something to think about. You want to have nectar plants and you want to have larval host plants, and we'll talk more about them a little bit later. Also, puddling areas, if you can set up an area, because they need moisture, but not anything too deep. They need a shallow, so like a little tray of sand with moisture that's wet, or a divot in the soil that can be kept moist. Something like that is another thing that will help butterflies and moths in your habitat. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. So hummingbirds are another important, pollinator. They focus on tubular flowers that are pretty brightly colored. Pink, orange, and red are their primary, favorites. And I put up the pictures of 3 plants to show the one on the top right, the one that's like fuchsia, that really, really bright pink. That's desert penstemon. It's currently in bloom right now. It's a little bit higher elevation plant, but I have seen it up by Seven Springs. Then the one in the middle is ocotillo. The flowers of that are just getting going too right now, and hummingbirds like them. There is a hummingbird in that picture, but it's hard to see. And then the bottom left is tuberosa, which is a great shrub that's blooms almost year round, and it's really a good hummingbird plant. So those are a few. There's also a list there of other hummingbird plants that you can support hummingbirds. The range is pretty wide because you could see everything from ocotillos and aloes and agaves are succulents, but then tuberosa and the desert honeysuckle and orange bells, those are all shrubs. And then desert willow is a tree. And then you have there was also, where in my list was it? It's a ground cover, verbena is a ground cover. So there's a whole host of different, forms of plants that will attract hummingbirds. And that's just one list. And I have a shorter video that I've developed that's just focused on providing for hummingbirds in the garden environment. So go ahead and advance slide, please. And bats are also especially important pollinators in the evening when they're active. They pollinate saguaros, organ pipes, and agaves. And 2 of the species around here, the lesser long-nosed and the Mexican long-tongued. And what's really interesting about them, and this is an example of coevolution, and this will come up a few times, is that, they, in response to the plant, they've the plant has created a situation where the longer the bat's tongue is, the more hairy it is, the more successful it's going to be at gathering, reaching the nectar, and then also hitting the pollen as well. So it's kind of a coevolution. So there's sort of these, over time, these relationships that have developed between pollinators and the plants that they use, sort of mutual adaptations that generally benefit each other. So the long tongues, and so the hair, again, remember we talked about the hairy bodies of the bees and how a lot of pollen can adhere. Same thing with the tongues of the bats. Go ahead and advance slide. So now we're at another question segment, because I just kind of went through and talked about the pollinators, and then the next half we'll talk about how to provide for them in the garden environment. So I just wanted to see if there were any questions before we went on. What inspired me to get into gardening? This is funny, right? When I was a kid, I had a neighbor next to me that gardened constantly. And I would look over at her and say, that is so boring. How can she do that? That's like, I would never want to do that. That's so boring. All she does is garden all day, all weekend, And now I'm that person. I mean, it's not the only thing I do, but it's a lot of what I do. people's habits can change over time, but I don't know what inspired me. I mean, I came out to the West and I love the plants here, a lot of things I'd never seen before compared to where I was from. And I think that got me excited. And then once I was growing a bunch of things in pots when I was a student and I didn't have any space, so, I just had plants in pots. And when I finally bought a house, I couldn't wait to put all this stuff outside because it was like, wow, I can finally like put it in the ground. It's been, you know, a decade, and actually I put like I had a saguaro that was maybe, I don't know, 6 inches tall that I'd grown in a pot and I put it out in the yard and now it's, quadrupled its size. And it's really cool to see that. And, there's just a lot of rewards to gardening and even more so in the pandemic, since we're spending more time at home and I can just sit out and enjoy this nature and kind of forget about that all for a little while. See what other are there plants that will attract a lot of hummingbirds and butterflies, but not bees? Hmm. Um, well, generally, well, if you were to focus on some of the yeah, if you're to focus on some of the tubular flowers that I put in the list, the hummingbird list, that would attract the hummingbirds for sure. Um, but there's a lot of crossover. A lot of the plants that will attract one will attract another. But you can kind of focus on some of the tubular flowers. Keep in mind that a lot of our native bees, first of all, only the females can sting. They only sting if they don't, aggressively seek people out, and they only would sting if, like, they get caught between clothing or, you sat on them or something like that. I, I've gotten so used to them, even the honeybees. I break through a whole line. Like I had all these penstemons blooming, and I'm like, I got to get in there and do something. I just walk right through them when they're all in the middle of nectaring at the plants, and they just carry on. Because when they're engaged in nectaring and in pollen gathering, that's what they're focused on. So if you have a hot, if you had like a hive of honeybees, that would be a problem. Or you want to watch for nests and things like that. Ground nesting bees, if you attracted them, you'd want to watch the nests and not step on the nests and things like that. But generally, when they're engaging in their acquiring food, that's what they're focused on, and they're not going to attack unless somebody attacks them. Let me kind of see the couple of the questions. Yes, penstemons, bees do use penstemons, so you're not going to exclude bees by growing penstemons. In fact, there's quite a few bees out on mine. Um, I don't know a lot about carpenter bees, but I don't know that the size correlates to how harmful they are. I don't know that much about them, but um, generally, I think I've only been stung twice in my life, and it was one time it was in the car. Like I felt this thing, and it was like, oh, something had gotten in the car, it got under my shirt and stung me. And another time was hanging out at a picnic table, by the beach, and it was like I've never been stung while gardening. Didn't they hurt other than the wood they would? Sorry, just reading over the questions. Yeah, I know a swarm is something different. That's a scary thing when you're out and about, out in the desert. I know there's times when they're moving, and this is generally, I think April, May is a time when you do see swarms. I don't know a lot about that. I'm just talking more about the gardening environment itself. I do not have a green thumb, but I wish I did. What are some tips? Ooh, that's a big, big, big question. I would say for here, for the Southwest, if you choose native plants, they're going to be adapted to our climate. They're going to be adapted to our soils and our lack of rain. And they're going to be able to do better than other things and require less maintenance. So that would be probably a first starting point. Um, I also have another recorded workshop because I can't go into that in detail, but on the website I have one on native plant gardening that I broke down into segments that might help as well with thinking about that. Because the whole green thumb thing, it's something that can be learned. It's definitely something that people can learn. Um, but yeah, those are just some general thoughts I have on that, just off the cuff. Can you send your second class? Yes, I will. I'll navigate. I'll let me see. We'll make sure to get it to you guys. Um, as far as sharing the link and the website, I think I can. Well, what I can do right now is I can just type the website link quickly. It's a little long. Whoops. Whoops. That is the website. And there's a drop down that says, I think it's learn about native plants, and then there's a workshops section, and that's where the videos are. I can also send a more direct link as a follow up. Oh, and thank you, Natalie. And I bet I know which Natalie this is because she knows a lot more about bees and a lot of these topics than I do. And she's letting us know that native bee stings are mild and only a problem if you're allergic. Yeah, and I've never encountered, uh, you know, you'll be lucky to have native bees in your yard, I think. Like I typically only see honeybees, and I'm trying to attract more native bees. Um, but I think just to have them in our yard is such a special thing. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next segment and talk about, so in a gardening environment, well, these apply to other environments too, but we're thinking specifically about gardening. What are some of the needs to support pollinators? So we'll look at pesticides and herbicides as being problematic. We'll talk about the need for bare ground. We'll talk about snags or constructed boxes or nest blocks for native bees. We'll talk about nesting and overwintering sites, and then plant design. So go ahead and advance the slide, please. So this is a really important consideration because most pollinators are insects, the bees, butterflies, the moths, the flies, the different ones you're talking about. So if you have pesticides being sprayed, um, that's going to directly kill a lot of that insect diversity that is the pollinators. So that's really problematic. There's also a certain class, a newer-ish class of pesticides called neonic. I can't pronounce this word. Neonics. I'm going to go with neonics, the shortened version. And it's a systemic pesticide, so it gets into all parts of the plant. And a lot of nurseries will spray the plants before they go out for sale, so that presumably insects aren't coming and destroying these plants people buy. But the problem with that is it's going to kill off the insects that you're trying to support in your yard. So that's problematic. Um, you know, so the recommendation across the board is try not to use them at all. But if you feel you have to, you can do so at times when pollinators are not active. You can do that when the flowers are not present, and use the minimum recommended dose on the label if you have to. Um, but integrated pest management can go a long way toward, sorry, yeah, those are all some notes that I had on the side for myself to remember some details. But um, as far as the integrated pest management, it's a whole holistic series, a process, a long-term process that uses a bunch of tools to try to manage pests in more natural ways. And there's a handout or a web link to a good source for that. Um, some of the things they do, first of all, it's like we're going to spray as like an absolute last resort. And the first thing we want to do is observe and figure out what insects do we even have. Because a lot of people automatically assume that whatever insect is in their yard must be a pest and we got to get rid of it. But actually, no, a lot of them could be beneficial, or, um, you don't want to spray them. So figuring out what you have and then using a variety of those biological controls, those cultural controls about how you take care of your space, all those things can reduce pests without having to spray. And then again, spraying would be like a final, um, resort. And it would only be very targeted to what exact pest you're trying to get rid of only. Um, and then herbicides, as weed killers, those are used a lot. But the problem there is you could be cutting down on the diversity in your spaces of flowering plants that you have. Some of the ones that are considered weedy are good nectar sources. So there's also a host plant that I think the admiral butterflies use that is considered a weed, stinging nettles. So that's just another thought. So that's one thing to think about is how can I cut these out totally or reduce them? And learning about integrated pest management is a good start. Go ahead and advance the slide. So here's something that I didn't know about when I first started gardening. I put gravel everywhere, and now I'm trying to undo that a bit because I've learned about 70% of our native bees nest in the ground, and if they don't have bare ground, they cannot nest, so they're not going to be able to be present. Um, and a lot of these bees are small, and their flight distances are very short. So they have to have not only a nesting site nearby to be present at all, but then they also need that nearby the foraging, the flowering site. So you'd want to have some bare ground areas, and you'd want to have nectar plants nearby so they can reach those plants and gather, the pollen, do pollination, um, and gather nectar. So what you can do is you can set aside some areas in your space if you have a yard that is untended, undisturbed, um, and it should be a sunny area. It should be regular desert soil, not improved, not tilled, well drained, and not and sparsely planted in the bare ground areas, and then having flowering plants pretty close. So that's one thing you can do to support, especially our native ground nesting bees. Advance the slide, please. And remember, we talked about another big group of native bees nest in dead wood. They tunnel and things like that. So they need a snag is a dead tree. So if folks I know this is not attractive and this isn't a typical practice, but thinking about gardening, more broadly, the idea that, if going back to some of Doug Tallamy's thoughts, if we're not providing for these species, where are they going to go? Humans are taking up more and more space on the planet. So the idea that, if we do some things that maybe, aren't necessarily attractive, but they're still providing. So it's a different type of beauty. It's like, think about, because a snag is kind of ugly. Leaving a dead tree is kind of ugly, and it could be dangerous as true, but if the dangerous as well. But if you can leave ones in places that aren't going to be a danger, to falling or something like that, they're going to be out of the way. It might not be possible for everyone. You can also create artificial snags by taking a log and kind of erecting it like a fence post. And this is going to allow them to have a place to nest. And again, it's a different way of thinking about gardening, because typically gardening has traditionally been only for the benefit of the gardener. What looks pretty for me, but now broaden it out to not only what's pretty for me, but what is going to support all the other creatures around me that we need, because we don't support our pollinators, it's going to be trouble for ecosystems around the world. So just some thoughts about thinking about gardening more broadly. Nest blocks are popular. A lot of people buy these commercial nest blocks, but there is a kind of a danger with those, is that they've been kind of calibrated in their size for a different type of bee that's not from here. I think orchard bees, some specific orchard bee, but for our bees, they're too shallow. And so what happens is the females will lay their eggs in the tunnels. So this is where they're going to reproduce. They're going to lay the eggs. And what's really cool about these bees is they have the ability to choose the gender of each offspring as they lay the egg. And so what they do is in the tunnel, they put males in the front and females in the back, as they choose the gender of each one as they lay an egg. And if the tubes are too narrow, then they won't lay enough females, and they'll just be males, and that's a problem, because we need the females. We need females. Females carry out the full. They're the only ones they take care of the next generation. They lay the eggs for the next generation. The males are only involved in reproduction, and then they die off. So if we don't have females, because we're having these blocks that are too, they're not deep enough, that's problematic. So I would say beware of buying the commercial blocks. And instead, there's a handout in the documents. I think that a link was provided to the documents for the workshop. from the Xerxes Society. It's actually so there's a book, Attracting Native Pollinators, a really good book from the Xerxes Society, and they talk about what are the dimensions for if you're going to build your own block, or if you're going to buy one, then you see the dimensions in that handout and you go off of that, because then you're going to be able to have the right size, because you don't want to end up with just males, because that's going to be problematic, for the species moving forward. Oh, can you show the book again? Yeah, it's called Attracting Native Pollinators, and it's published by the Xerxes Society. It's a 2011 book. This book was really helpful to me as far as learning a lot about certain aspects of this topic that I wasn't aware of. So these are cool because then you can kind of see some of these processes going on, as far as the reproduction of the bees. So we'll go ahead and advance the slide, please. So now, we know they need nesting sites, the pollinators, and they need overwintering sites. Bees will overwinter in their nests. So if you can leave those areas undisturbed in the wintertime, um, those bare ground areas or those the blocks we were just talking about. Now, butterflies, depending on the species, they can overwinter in any part of their life cycle. It depends on the species. Some may overwinter as eggs. And if you recall back to our discussion of the butterflies, the eggs will be found on the larval host plants. So you don't want to go ahead and in the wintertime, shear, your larval host plants, because you're going to kill the eggs. Same thing with the larvae. Larvae are the caterpillars. They can be found on the host plant. And sometimes, I can never pronounce it right, the pupae, pupae, cannot get that one right ever. That's when they're in the chrysalis stage. They may be found hanging from the host plants as well. So don't disturb your larval host plants and the surrounding areas, because also sometimes they may pupate on surrounding things, surrounding the host plant. So just have to be really careful about that. You can also create various artificial overwintering sites, rocks or log piles. Um, if you think about a place where you can help shield from prevailing wind and rain, um, as far as logs, you can stack them crisscrossed with 3 to 4 inch gaps to provide some artificial overwintering sites. So those are just some thoughts as far as other things you could do in the garden environment. Please advance the slide. Now we get to the area that I'm most familiar with as far as, okay, so you have a space. It doesn't have to be large space. It could be a small space. What plants, especially if I have a small space, what are the plants that are going to be most valuable to me to support pollinators? So the first thing is using native plants as much as possible. There's a whole bunch of reasons. I won't get into all of them. Just hit some highlights, but there's an infographic on the website that talks about all the importance of native plants. But at the end of the day, those plants are adapted to this environment. The soils, all the different climatic conditions. Of course, although those are changing, but they are the most adapted to what we have now. There's also that coevolution piece, that native plants have co-evolved with our native pollinators, so there's going to be kind of a fit there. And there's been a lot of studies that show that native plants benefit our native pollinators more than non-natives, not to say that some introduced plants don't provide some good wildlife value too. They do, but if you use natives as much as possible, so if you have a few favorite, introduced or non-native species, that's okay, but they shouldn't be, the majority of your yard or space, because you're just not going to attract anything. A lot of the yards around me are like inert. Like I walk by and I see, oh, they have like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 species over there of plants, and half of them are not native and the other ones aren't necessarily high wildlife value, and I see nothing going on. I see no birds, I see no insects. It's almost like an inert landscape, and that's what I'm trying to get, move people away from that direction and more to a living landscape. And that's another one of Doug Tallamy's ideas, is this idea of the living landscape. And so if you use native plants, you're going to attract more wildlife. And we're going to talk more about, some more specific things about those plants in the slide and beyond. Diversity is important. So if you can provide, and 8 to 10 was kind of a bare minimum that I was seeing across various sources. If you could come up with 8 to 10 different species, and that's a good start. And you should have nectar plants because that's going to help provide, that's going to bring in, adult butterflies. It's going to attract, it's going to attract bees. It's going to attract hummingbirds, the various pollinators we talked about, and then host plants for butterflies. So that would be kind of a start. This idea of clumping, and this is so that the pollinators can see these plants from, from above. They can see it from a distance by having clumps of the plants. So imagine at least 3 feet in diameter. So if the shrub is already going to be that size, you don't have to plant, multiples of that plant. But if it's smaller plants, like perhaps like milkweeds, you want to have clumps of at least 3 feet in diameter because that's going to be easier for them to see, and it's going to make it more efficient for them as far as when they're traveling and pollinating. They can visit more flowers in a shorter amount of time by having them clumped. So that's another kind of design consideration if you can think about clumping for anything, individual species that are smaller than 3 feet in diameter, add multiples of the plant. And then going back to what we talked about with the flight distances, especially of some of the smaller bees, we want to make sure that there are flowers, nectar, not more than a few 100 feet away from, if you have the nest blocks or if you have a bare ground, try to have flowering plants not more than a few 100 feet away. And then this is a really important piece, is that you want to have something, and the recommendation is three species blooming at all time, nectar plants at all time in the yard, which actually would put you up to really about 12 different species. That could be something to aim for if you don't have that many, or you're working towards something like that. That would be a recommendation, to have at least 3 species flowering in a season. If you emphasize early spring, because that's when insects are starting to get active again, and they need their food sources right away. And then also late fall blooms, when often things are kind of going into winter mode, would be another time to really make sure that you don't have gaps. So what you can do is you can do like an inventory, like what species, do I have on my property? And maybe, kind of come up with, okay, how many plants, different species do I have? And are they nectar plants? Are they host plants? And we'll look at the palettes in a minute. But if you kind of analyze what you have and say, well, okay, how many species do I have? All right, how many are nectar? How many are blooming in the fall, spring, winter, summer, that sort of thing? Do I have any larval host plants? Do I have clumps? Kind of look at those different things and then figure out how you might be able to improve a habitat that you have, or build one from scratch if you're just starting out. And you don't have to have it all at once. You can kind of add these things in stages as you go. But that's kind of, the overall thought as far as the different ways that you can support pollinators through what plants you're putting in. So now we can do, I'm not sure if we should, I have my final segment is to look at the plant palettes, which is like lists of plants, and we can go through them. I have 4 to offer. But maybe I should just stop and see if there's any questions. Some of the questions might be answered by looking at the palettes, though. So I'll just go and see what questions people have, and then we'll dive into the palettes, and then that might drive some more questions as well. So any questions about, um, planting or the other things we talked about as far as supporting pollinators in the garden? So I'm not seeing anything come up right now, so I'll go ahead and, oh, I just got one. The question I get asked the most is, what is easy to grow? Yes, well, I guess the question back to you would be, easy to grow when you buy it from the nursery, as a plant or easy to grow from seed? Because those were probably two different questions. Um, what I will do is I'm going to go through the palettes and I will point out some that are easy to grow in both situations. I'll kind of work that into my discussion of the palettes. I also have a list of on my website of easy to grow from seed plants that are in the seed library. Um, but generally, easiest to keep alive after buying it. Yeah, I would say, and now that we're moving into the summer months and we're feeling, the heat turning up into the 90s already, the hardest time of year to keep your plants alive here is the summer. So if you follow a couple of things, if you select natives that are more on the xeric side, especially if you're not going to be doing a lot of watering. And if you plant them in the fall, that's going to be, I think, a really good recipe because when you plant them in the fall, the soil is still warm, which is good because the roots need time to develop. That's the first part of the plant that's gonna once it's planted. Oh, I need my roots. I need to get my good roots in here. So they spend a lot of time developing their roots over that time, and the soil's still warm. But you have all the way from, let's say, October until April when it's going to get hot again for those plants to acclimate and get established. So if you plant in the fall, you're going to have the best success here, I think, in the Sonoran Desert. And if you choose native plants, I can name some off the top of my head. I mean, I have to say that Chuparosa, that one that we looked at a few times, the shrub with the red tubular flowers, it's a hummingbird plant. It does great for me, even in my south-facing front yard that has almost no shade and has no drip. And I only water it like once a week in the summer. And sometimes I skip a week if it's still looking really good. That one and creosote, and actually desert lavender are three that just seem to be pretty tough. And there's a whole bunch of other ones, but those are just some thoughts I have. I hope that helps. Blake, and I think who else asked? Jane, if you have any follow-ups on that, we can talk more about it too. I'll talk a little bit more about it with the palettes. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into these palettes now and talk about this. So what I did was, with all my time of, growing all these various plants and looking at how they do, I've developed these different groupings or lists of plants that I think are suited for here. They're native to here, but they're ones that I think in particular with the starter palettes. What's going on with the starter palettes is that those are plants that you should be able to find at local nurseries. Now that doesn't mean you pull up and you'll find all these plants at any of the local nurseries. It may take a little bit of hunting around and going to more than one. But in general, these are plants that I have seen at local nurseries, so you can buy them. You don't have to grow them from seed. So that's sort of a starter palette. I have a nectar one that's high value nectar plants, and I have one that's for larval hosts for butterflies. Then the other two palettes are for people who, wow, I've already, built out and I want to have even more plants and I want to go further. And I have these advanced palettes, but those are going to require either traveling to Tucson, where the nurseries that have a lot of the good natives for our area are, or growing them from seed. So, and then there's a nectar and there's a larval host one. So let's go ahead and pull up the palettes. Let's see, we have them as PDFs, right? Believe so. Let's look at the starter nectar one first. And I'll come back. I see there's been at least one other question coming up. I'll come back to that. Let's see. I don't see it coming up yet. Is it just my view that I'm not seeing it?
No, I'm getting it. I didn't know I had to have it ready. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'll
I'm
get it
sorry.
in
I'm
just a
so
sec. You're
sorry.
okay. I just
Yeah,
need to find it.
that's okay. I think what
I
it
have
was
it
is
already. The starter palettes there.
yes,
Okay.
please. Yep, the
Got
nectar
it.
one. Yeah, I apologize. I had them on my
You're
computer.
fine.
That's when I
You're
thought I
fine.
was going to be doing the sharing.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
Uh, Let me get this.
So this palette is going to be organized by type of plant. So it's going to have trees and then shrubs and then grasses. Well, no, grasses won't be in this list because it's nectar plants only. So the first palette will be plants that are really good nectar sources, so they're going to attract various pollinators, um, and
I'm just gonna
and they
do
should be
this.
available.
Does that work?
Okay.
I
Yeah.
didn't download it. I just opened it, so this will just save us some time. There you go.
Yeah, sure. So we'll just scroll through it. So remember we talked about try to get 3 blooming plants in every season. So what I did was for each of these plants, I have their scientific name on the left, then their common name, and then every month of the year, and the X's are when they're expected to bloom, and then some notes. So basically, what you'd want to do is say, okay, well, all right, I got this space I can grow plants in, and I want to try to have nectar plant. I'm going to try to have at least, 3 if I can, but maybe 2 or maybe at least 1 blooming in every season. So go through and take a look, and you can, start with an inventory. Like, what do I already have that's on this list? And when is it blooming, so I can fill in my gaps. Like, let's say for example, let's say you do have a desert willow. That's that really pretty tree that's got the pink tubular fragrant flowers. Well, if you have a desert willow, you know that you're blooming, you have April through September bloom kind of covered, so you're covering kind of 2 seasons there already. So, you try to look and make sure. You just want to, the aim is to have something blooming year round. And if you can have 3 different species blooming year round, that would be kind of an ideal target. So you can kind of go through. And so I have 5 different trees that are native trees listed there that are all good nectar sources. Should be able to find them, like I said, at local nurseries, but you may have to, hunt a little bit. You won't find everything at one place. The shrubs. There's quite a lot of shrubs. Um, and then their bloom periods. I have this notation on some of the shrubs that says blooms more often with supplemental watering or rain. That means that if you give it like this superstition mallow, mine blooms way more than 3 months a year. Mine has been blooming almost continuously and probably will do so. Um, yeah, some of them are on drip and some aren't, but they're all kind of doing a lot of that. So just be aware that the bloom period that I'm showing is kind of a minimum for a lot of these, and you'll get blooms even longer if you have supplemental like drip irrigation or if you're watering or if we're actually getting rain. So that's something to keep aware of too. So look down this list, and some of these are hummingbird, desert honeysuckle, um, wolfberry, tuberosa. There's quite a bit of hummingbird plants in here. I know some folks were asking about that. So you can see, and here's some real strong performers. I talked about tuberosa. Some people were asking about what's hard to kill or, what does well. Well, 2 of the ones I mentioned, tuberosa, actually, and desert lavender, look at the bloom periods on them. They're blooming almost, yeah, I don't think there's a time that goes by. There might be a short period where in the summer that I don't see my tuberosa blooming, and that's because I'm not watering it. Um, but they're really strong performers. If you have those plants, that fills a lot of need. My desert lavender, all day long, there's bees all day long on those plants. So those are some really good ones. Looking further down, I should mention any other easier to grow. That desert senna is a pretty yellow flowered plant. That's actually also a host plant. We'll talk about that again in that list. Pretty xeric. That means it's really good with dry conditions. So that would be easy to grow too in terms of that. Same thing with desert globe mallow. Um, those tend to pop up on their own in a lot of places. They can get even almost weedy. But they're designated as special value to native bees by the Xerces Society, being a plant that provides above and beyond value to native bees. So that's a really good one, and it doesn't take a lot of watering or fussing with, and they start to, as you have the natural or the native color generally is orange, but as you start to let these plants proliferate, they start coming up with all these different color variations. And the SEC campus has an amazing amount of globe mallows in different colors. They're all been blooming lately and still going. So that's another one that is easy to grow and that would recommend. And it's also a host plant. We'll look at that too. A lot of perennials. Um, that rush milkweed. The milkweeds are typically known for being host plants for monarchs and queens, but they're also a great nectar source. Notice that rush milkweed is designated as special value to native bees. So you're going to be supporting a lot of native bees in addition to butterflies if you put in that milkweed. Um, let's see, a couple of, oh, Blackfoot daisy is another one that's really hardy. It's really pretty. It's these small white, you can see pictures of a lot of these plants on the website and other places, Googling them, of course, Wikipedia should have, images of a lot of these plants. But Blackfoot daisy's really hardy too. It tends to volunteer. That means come up on its own in my yard. It does bloom more often than those 4 months too, with the extra water. So let's keep going down. Um, so there's a couple of cacti in here that are good nectar sources, including saguaro, including yucca and prickly pear and ocotillo. So, um, you know, there's a whole range of plants that will serve as good nectar plants. And then there's some annuals. Now, these annuals are like wildflowers. They just live for a season. Sometimes you can buy them as plants, but a lot of times you have to grow them from seed, but they're so easy to grow from seed that I did put them on the starter list, even though technically I said those would just be plants. But a lot of these are really fun to grow too and easy to grow. Sunflower, the poppies, a lot of those, they just, it's easy to seed and get those to come up. Let me see, let's go down just a little bit further. Yeah. So that is, and so again, you don't have to have all those plants. That was a lot of plants. That was just to give you a list to choose from. So find out, what do I have in my yard and where are my gaps? Do I not have something blooming in the winter? Do I not have something blooming in the summer? Can I get 3 different species in each period? Can I work toward that? Maybe if your space is too small, mm, I don't know though. With the proper selection of plants, you might, because you notice some of those plants can bloom year round. So with the proper choice of plants, you might be able to pull off with a smaller amount of species in a smaller space, getting something blooming, all the time. At least one thing, if not a couple. So that is my nectar palette. Um, let's go ahead and go to the starter host plant palette. And in the meantime, I'll answer a question. There's a couple questions that came up. How to make homemade mycelium and mycorrhiza. I don't know that. I have not tried to do that, and I don't know the answer to that. So I apologize about that. Um, let's see. Oh, you mentioned traveling to Tucson. Why? I don't know why it's a better source. I don't know how that has come about over time, but I just know that there's at least two really good nurseries down there. One's called Desert Survivors, and they're right off of Speedway and the 10, and they have several hundred species of natives, not only to the Sonoran Desert, but more broadly in the region. And I've gotten so many of my plants there, and it's a great organization, and they do a lot of good um, beyond the nursery itself. And another one called Spadefoot Nursery. I don't know why that's historically happened, that Maricopa County hasn't been as excited about native plants as Tucson, but it's definitely, a thing that I'm trying to help work on. Unfortunately, there was a good nursery here, Arcadia Color Garden, that just closed. That was in the Arcadia area, not far from the Botanical Garden. That was a good source. There's a few others, but there's not a lot. Um, yes, container gardening. So on the website, I have a list of plants that are good in containers, and I will try to actually going from that list that we were looking at with the starter plant, the palette. Chocolate flower grows well in pots, and I don't remember if Greg's Mistflower was on the nectar list. Probably was. Those are two, and there's one called Snapdragon Vine that's in the seed library that not only grows well in pots, but I've had really good luck in germinating it easily. So those are just 3 off the top of my head with living in an apartment. Just be aware with container gardening, I do much better with plants in the ground than in containers, because with containers you have to water more often, especially in the summer. So just be aware of, it could be possible to have to water some things even daily obviously not your cacti or succulents, but if you have other things in pots, and if they're in full sun, they're going to dry out fast. And thank you for putting the address in for Desert Survivors. And also, Natalie, thank you for about the mycorrhiza. That's really cool. I have not tried that. I'm going to have to try that as one of my next things to tackle. Okay, let's look at the larval host plant palette. Because if you remember, if you want to support butterflies through their life cycle, then got to have larval host plants for them to lay their eggs on. And remember, they have that specificity. Now, with the nectar plants, generally there's not as much specificity. If there's nectar, you know, they'll generally visit. They may have preferences, but with the host plants, it's like I've got to have that plant or that group of plants, or I will not lay my eggs. So it's kind of a much more, a rigid requirement. So we'll look at this larval host plant, list. And these are ones that, again, that generally you should be able to find locally. And you might be surprised at what's on the list because, and I didn't know it right away when I got started, I was surprised to discover how many nectar plants are also larval host plants for some butterfly or moth or group thereof. So it's really kind of cool that you can do double duty, with the palettes by careful selection. You don't have to have a ton of stuff, but you can see, okay, like if there's a certain butterfly that you want to, you know, uh, that maybe you've seen in your yard or you want to see in your yard, then you could, you know, try to get that larval host plant or several individuals of it to try to get them to take up residence there. Oh, I'm
Okay, did
sorry.
I
This
get
is
what you needed
No, I'm
finally?
sorry. I'm sorry. It's the starter larval host plant palette. I
Oh,
apologize.
okay. No, I think you said that. I thought, okay.
And this is organized. I'm trying to remember how I organized it. I think I just organized it by name of plant, and it'll have what butterfly or moth or group of butterflies or moths will be supported by that plant. Oh, sorry. We want the starter larval host. This is the one that is where you'd have to drive for plants. So this would be like, I want to go above and beyond, you know, and maybe you never want, maybe that's not an intention. It doesn't have to be. It's just, the list is there for folks who might want to go that far. I think that the starter palettes, even just having a fraction of those plants will go a long way.
Banjo light switch. Make sure I have this ready to go.
Yeah, I
Look at
apologize.
it. That's the washer.
I
Yeah.
have it as a PDF on my screen if you want me to switch to sharing.
Oh, banjo light switch. I'm working on it. I was out in my printed up one, so.
I'm just kind of looking back to make sure I didn't miss any questions in the meantime. If anybody has any other
I have it
questions.
made up, but not printed. Banjo light switch.
Can you share yours now, or do I need to?
Banjo.
Do you want me to share mine?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, let me
I
see if
don't
I
think I
can.
downloaded all of them, so
That's okay.
there you go.
Okay, am I, oh, yeah, my
Yep,
screen is changing now.
yep.
Okay, now I just have to get, so it was larval host starter. Okay, I think I got it. Oh, everything looks funny now. Okay, got it. But you all can see it now, right?
Yes.
So I have this organized alphabetically by scientific name, and then you can see, okay, what's the common name? What type of plant is it? And then what is it a host for? So this superstition mallow is one that was listed as a a nectar plant in the other list. But if you get it, you'll also be able to provide for the Arizona powdered skipper, northern white skipper, several different skippers and moth species by having that plant. So you've hit double duty of nectar for bees, mostly bees I see on superstition mallow, but and then some of these butterflies and moths. So you can kind of get a sense, and you can kind of say, well, I think it's cool. I don't know, maybe you have a particular butterfly you really, you have a fancy for. Excuse me. Um, you know, you could kind of, start to match up and get the plants that will be able to support that. Or you could say, well, I want to have, get a couple of these plants that are, hit a lot of different ones. Like the desert hackberry is a beautiful native shrub. It's actually in the Cienega at Red Mountain. And, it supports a lot of different, as a larval host, a lot of different butterflies and at least one type of moth. So if you look to this list, you can kind of over time just add a few different plants. I want to point out mesquite, our native mesquite, velvet mesquite. Look at all of the hosts, the various moths and butterflies it's a host for, and it has so many other values. I mean, the shade, the pods are edible. It's great for birds, and it's really xeric. So, if you have a space for it, it's great to have at least maybe one of our native mesquites, not the not the Chilean mesquites. They don't provide the same kind of habitat, and benefits. But yeah, so kind of go through and you can see that what I think is really cool about host plants is they can surprise you. Like I didn't know that some grasses were host plants for skipper butterflies or hosts for anything, until I started looking into it more. So there's 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 a vine, passion vine, very popular. It provides for various fritillary butterflies, including the Gulf fritillary, which is here. Um, so you can be really surprised by anything from trees down to annuals. Like lupins is a type of wildflower, and they are two different blue and hair streak butterflies, and there's a lot of different species of blue butterflies. So several species of those in hair streaks. So kind of just looking through and saying, can I get, at least 3 things flowering every season, or at least something, start with at least something flowering that's a nectar plant every season. And then also maybe adding in some host plants or choosing, host plants or choosing nectar plants that also happen to be host plants, which I probably should come up with some scheme for cross-listing these things, because they're on 2 different lists. But this is
Danielle,
generally, uh,
a question was asked about mesquites. What are the ones that are prone to fall over during storms?
I think Palo Verdes are more prone to fall over than mesquites, at least from my experience. And typically it's because folks have not watered them deeply and infrequently. If they're watered very regularly and very shallowly, their roots will be shallow and they'll topple. So I would say, I don't know that there's a specific species of mesquite that falls over. I'm not aware, but to me, Palo Verdes have always toppled more than mesquites. Mesquites can take some pruning though, that you might need somebody with some expertise perhaps to do. Sometimes they don't look that good if they haven't been pruned well, selectively and properly, rather than the way that, people sometimes do that. There are some good handouts on pruning that the cooperative extension has, Arizona Cooperative, on how to properly do it. So this is really the end of the content. I know I went a little bit longer, perhaps with a little bit verbose in some sections, but I know we had time for questions already, which is great. And I just want to see like if folks have any other questions or thoughts. I'll go back to the chat. I think all these documents will be available for everybody ongoing, correct? I
Deborah,
think
are
in the
we
Google.
sharing the documents? Did you share that link where they can get them, or where will they be?
I thought it was shared at the
Yes, I
beginning
have.
of the, yeah.
Yes, I did share at the beginning. I can see if
So
I can
would
get it
you
in
share
there now.
again, since people who maybe were here at the weren't here at the beginning would have access to those? Thank you.
And those are also on the website too. They'll stay up there. I hope I answered so far some of the questions that came in. And so I just want to see if folks have other thoughts or other questions. You could always also follow up too. Oh, let me put the address, the email address into the chat. That's the email address. You can reach me for the seed library if anything comes up question wise as well. But I'll stay as long as the folks have questions. Happy to answer any or entertain questions that I can answer. Can't always answer them all, of course. Someone's asking about proof of attendance.
Okay.
Okay, we usually put up the slide, the first slide for proof of attendance, and then they can do a snapshot.
Okay, so do you want the first slide up there? I thought earlier, because I couldn't see the chat, I just seen when they pop up. Someone was asking about, will the presentation be available? Where are we going to be posting? I know it's being recorded, so where will the recording be posted?
I'm not sure where it was going to be. I think that it was going to be shared with me as one way, and I was going to post it to my YouTube and my website, but I'm not sure if there's somewhere else it's going to go as well.
Yes, right now, once it is up, I can share it with you. So if anybody would like a copy, go ahead and email me. I just put my email or contact information up there. There you go. There is the first slide. So you can go ahead and take a snapshot of that for attendance.
Does anybody know what butterfly and what plant that is?
Monarch?
Nope.
Really? Huh.
Mm-mm. Yeah, it's easy to get them.
Huh.
What about the shrub? I'll give you the hint. It's a shrub. It's an edible shrub, actually. The plant it's wolfberry. It's a shrub you'll see growing on a lot of the trails in the hiking in the valley, and um, it's a good nectar plant as well. And the berries are edible. I eat them right off the vine the bush as I'm hiking. And that's a queen. I'm pretty sure that's a queen. Yeah. One time I got a queen and a viceroy mixed up, but this is a queen. The monarch, if you pull up, Google pictures of monarchs, you'll see the difference. And I can't remember I think it has to do where the dots are. There's probably somebody else that can give me a more specific on that. Also, the monarchs are larger. They fly differently too. Yeah, that's right. Yep. To me, the monarchs always seem like a stronger flyer. Yes, I think I've seen some good websites. If you Google like monarch versus queen, I think there might be some good side-by-side pictures. And when you see them side by side, you'll see the size difference and the way the dots. It's something about the dots. I can't recall the specific off the top of my head. It says for the Google link that there's a code that's needed. I don't know what that is. As far as the permissions go. It might have to be changed. The Google Drive might have to be changed to say something like allow anybody with the link to view it.
Right.
Yeah,
I
because
bet that's
sometimes,
right.
yeah, especially if it's outside of Maricopa.
Right.
Yep. Yep. Well, I
Is
hope
that,
that you guys
yeah,
found, oh God, sorry.
I was gonna say, Deborah, did you create that? Can you put that in the, for access to allow everybody?
Yes, I'm following up on that.
Okay, great, great. So she'll take care of that so you guys have access to that.
Also, another cool thing would be to pull up and look at the difference in what the monarch and the queen larvae or caterpillars look like, because then you can tell them apart if you see any on the milkweeds, and I've gotten them before. And I think one thing is that I can't remember which is which, but one has 3 antennae and one has two, or three sets or two sets of antennae. If Natalie's still here, she can probably give us the specifics on that. She knows a lot more about that. I just trying to remember the detail. I think it was 3 versus 2 sets, and I can't remember which was which. And it's been a couple of years since I've seen a monarch larvae. Um, but that's one really cool thing about having host plants is you can see them, the larvae, and then sometimes you'll see them, you'll be lucky enough to see that they turn into a chrysalis, and then sometimes you'll even be lucky enough to see them come out of that and emerge as adults. Thank you. 2 sets for monarchs. So 3 sets of antennae for queen larvae. Yeah. Oh, and Marie is reminding everyone that they distribute seeds. Oh, it just jumped off. Through the Mesa Cares, and that's right, vegetable garden seeds. We have vegetable garden seeds and native plant seeds that the Mesa Cares at Red Mountain. When are those? That's on a regular date, right? Like a
Yeah, that the
Wednesday?
next, Danielle and everyone, this is Marie. Hi. The next event is April 21st. And so it's kind of cool because Sarah will probably be there with people from Student Life and she will handing out seeds. So just come up by curbside and we can help you.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of vegetable seeds that you guys have. You have quite an arsenal there. I'm excited when I see the inventory, and a lot's been given out too.
And that may be the last one for this semester, because in May, I'm not sure if they're gonna have one. It usually kind of gets warm.
I
So
think
Yeah.
this
so.
may
Ken.
be the last one.
I think you're correct. And I think what's kind of fabulous is we've been handing out an average of like 250 to 270 seeds, packages of seeds during those events. So it is kind of cool. And we love seeing everyone, students, community members, anyone who'd like to get some seeds.
So for those of you that are still here, I'm just wondering, was there anything, and you could put in the chat window that really stuck out to you, something that you were surprised by or didn't know or thought was an important piece of information or something like that? I'd just be curious to see what kind of resonates with people. I saw someone had put something in like that a little ways back in the chat. I forgot what it was, and I want to look at it again. I think she was saying she was surprised. Oh, she had no idea bats are pollinators, bees nested in the ground, and things like that. So, yeah, there's a lot of little details that we don't always know about, until we start to learn about it. So, just curious to see if folks had um, some thoughts. So, difference between queens and monarchs. Yep. And there's the viceroy that I got confused with the queen that I've seen once in Seven Springs. So you can kind of look at that, pictures of that too to see that male bees. Oh yeah. Well, that is kind of true. In not always, but in a lot of species, as far as the females doing a lot of the care. Not always. There's animals where both the male and the female provide care to the young and things like that. How many pollinators? Yep. Didn't realize that plants had, oop, there's so many things coming in now. I can't look at them. Oh, that's great. I love it. Let me see. I just want to go through them one by one. Uh, Plants had different jobs. Yes. Yes. There's so many uses. The ethnobotany is the whole field of study of human uses of plants. So not even just all the ways that nature plants are critical, to nature, all ecosystems, even in a lot of some aquatic ecosystems. Well, Yeah, so there's a lot of different, uses, human uses too. And so that's a whole field that we didn't really even talk about, as far as medicinal uses of plants and all those sort of things. Um, oh, yeah, you know what, Natalie? I just learned that there's this butterfly expert in New Mexico. I just took a class with him yesterday, and he told me about the I can't say the word proboscis. I want to say proboscis, but he was calling it proboscis or something. And he was saying that they get clogged with pollen. Yeah, I know that was just like something I really didn't know. So they're almost trying to avoid the pollen, which isn't good, but you know, let me see. Oh yeah, the constancy. Isn't that cool? I mean, that benefits the plants almost more than it does the bees necessarily. The bare dirt surprised me. Yes, actually, a messy yard is good for wildlife, in a lot of ways. You don't have to have a perfect yard. In fact, if you don't clean up, like, the blowers and all this, people are blowing all that stuff all over the place because they don't want the debris. But if you leave, like when I have a plant, leaf fall, when the leaves fall, like on some of my plants that lose their leaves in the winter or the times when it's dry, those leaves will enrich the soil over time, so by having a so-called messy yard, you're going to be you're also not having the blowers, making the air pollution worse and all that sort of stuff. But you're right, you don't have to have a perfect yard. I mean, messy, I mean, there's times you can run afoul of HOAs or municipalities and things like that, but having it a little messier has a lot of benefits to us and to wildlife. See, bees engender of offspring. Yeah. Oh, yeah, not just appeals to the eye, but it's just a different way of thinking because I think, gardeners have been so focused on the aesthetic of what does the yard, look like for me, and trying to have those perfect, English cottage gardens or whatever these things were. Um, but thinking more broadly, I think is going to be a benefit for everyone, not just human life, but all life. My favorite phrase, they're called leaves because you're supposed to leave them. Yeah, that's great. Wildlife loves a messy yard. Well, that's great, guys. I really appreciate all of you and all of you taking the time to come and all your great questions and insight. I hope that you'll follow up, or hope you'll use the seed library and follow up if you have any questions. But this time it looks like we're getting near time. I'll hang out if there's any other questions. I'm happy to stick around or answer your questions at a later date, but I'll kind of end so if folks need to get going to give them a chance to depart. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your week.
Danielle, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Well, thank you guys. It wouldn't have been possible without all of you being here and everyone's interest and great questions. And I thank our host and co-host for keeping us on track.